Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about car auctions because right now, whenever I see any sort of video talking about auto auctions, it's all doom and gloom and that the world is ending because cars aren't selling at auction. And well, I want to talk about this in today's video. But before we dive in, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So we're going to start things off by diving into the Mannheim market report. Now, I actually went over quite a few details with this report in another video, but I didn't really talk about the auction side of things because, well, I wanted to make a dedicated video about it. So first off, what this market report showed over the sales month of January is that the average car that crossed the auction block sold for 99.7% of market value. So what this means is that the average car that gets sold at auction is selling for slightly below market value. Now, the next number to dive into is going to be the sales conversion rate. This is the amount of cars that get sold at auction versus the amount of cars that don't get sold at auction. And the sales conversion rate for January was about 57%. Now, to put that number into context, in December, it was like 50%. And in November, it was like under 50%. And prior to the pandemic, it was usually in that 57% range. So currently, we are seeing an auction sales trend similar to what we saw prior to the pandemic. So things at auction look relatively normal when you look at the figures. However, with that being said, there are certain market conditions that basically show that this market's a little bit different than what we were experiencing in 2019. The first big thing is the decline in wholesale values. If you look at wholesale values in January of 2022 versus January of 2023, on average, most cars lost almost 14% in value, which is absolutely massive, way more than what we're going to see in a normal market. And on top of that, the declines are still continuing. Now, they're not continuing at the rate that they were before. I mentioned this in another video where I talked about how January was a pretty boring month when it came to wholesale values because certain segments increased in price, other segments slightly decreased in price, but overall, the net end of the month deal was pretty much values were somewhat break even. Not quite, but it wasn't a month that we would consider normal in today's market where we expect wholesale values to decline by a massive amount. And by the end of the month, everything is worth substantially less than what it was at the beginning of the month. And then the next two things that make this current auction scene a little bit different than what we see in a normal market is first off, the fact that car repos are on the rise. We're almost at like 6% in terms of the repossession rate. And so with more car repos happening, we're going to have more repos at auction, which is frankly going to drag values down slightly because repossessed cars are usually in pretty bad condition. But the other thing to mention is this repossession rate is still within like historical norms. Like it's not like crazy through the roof quite yet. And so it's too soon to tell exactly what this will do. But that is something that's a little bit different, is that repo rate just increasing at a pretty exponential rate, it seems like. And then the other thing is new cars being sold at auction. Now, I couldn't find any statistics on how many new cars are being sold at auction. But what I can tell you anecdotally is whenever I ask car dealers if they're selling new cars at auction, they tell me no. They say that it's completely pointless, that at this point with how the market is basically existing right now, it doesn't make sense. They would lose money on the new cars if they sold that at auction, and that they are better off just keeping the car and trying to retail it to a customer. And you know, a lot of them with their last ditch effort are basically selling these cars to rental car companies like Hertz, for example, or Enterprise is another one that a lot of dealerships will sell their cars to. And so again, I'm not saying that this isn't like a big thing that's happening, but I can't find any statistics on it. And on top of that, other than, you know, what I'm seeing on social media, people posting new cars at auction, when I talk to dealers, they tell me that it's not something that they partake in. And then the last point I want to make with this section of the video is by talking about the condition of cars that are getting sent to auction. I've seen a lot of things on social media talking about how cars that are getting sent to auction are in way worse condition than what we normally see. And again, this is something where I tried to find data on it and couldn't, so I started talking to dealers. And what I started hearing from them is that what we're seeing at auction isn't really anything out of the norm. What dealers basically told me is that they expect cars that are sold at auction to be in worse condition than cars they're going to get traded in. And this is something that I can tell you I experienced when I worked at the dealership. If someone came in and traded in a car, 9 times out of 10, that car that they were trading in was substantially nicer than the cars that we had purchased at auction. And the other thing to note is with auction cars, dealers are always going to have to pay more money for those versus, a car that they get traded in for a customer with most car deals. There obviously are exceptions. And again, I can tell you anecdotally, when I worked in the car business, if we had someone come in and trade in a car and then we went and resold that car, the amount of markup that we had in that was usually quite a bit more than what we had in auction cars. A lot of times with these cars that we were purchasing at auction, we were basically breaking even with our sales price. Sometimes we were even losing a little bit of money, and I know that that might not make sense on the surface, but we wanted to have those cars because it was extra car deals that we could put together, and obviously the dealership could then make money via other avenues. And so the point with this section is that, yeah, there are a lot of crappy cars being sold at auction, but there are always a lot of crappy cars being sold at auction. Dealers expect to pay more money for an auction car and to get a car that is in worse condition than what they could get with a trade-in. And the main reason why they're willing to pay to do that is so that they can bulk up their inventory to bring in more customers to put together more car deals, because getting a car deal is far better than not getting a car deal, especially with the trajectory that the market is going in. So with all the information that we have on hand and with what I have learned from car dealers, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here and say that the auction situation isn't all that bad. Again, we have a buy rate that is similar to historical norms, and we have people paying about market value for cars at auction. They're not paying above market value, and they're not paying significantly below market value. They're paying, again, 99.7% of what market value is on cars. And so, again, the data shows that we have a pretty normal auction setup right now. And so all these channels and all these people saying doom and gloom, the auction is going to destroy everything. It's like the data doesn't show that. And data, frankly, doesn't lie. But with that being said, I think that this trend is actually going to continue to increase with time, because I've had several dealers tell me that they feel like they've oversold their pre-owned inventory. Again, over the last few months, I've talked about how certain dealers put themselves in a pretty bad situation where they had a lot of inventory that they were underwater on because they just paid too much for it and values declined a lot. But for the most part, most dealers have pretty much fixed that situation. Like the average new car dealer that I talk with basically will have most of their inventory where they're completely fine in it, and they might have like 1 or 2 cars out of 100 or 200 cars where they're underwater with those vehicles because they just still haven't sold them. And so it's such a negligible amount compared to their entire inventory that it doesn't really matter. And so with dealers feeling like they are finally in a good position with their inventory and like they might have oversold, this is going to push them to, try to get more cars, aka go to auction more often. And again, the data supports this, right? The auction take rate increased by 7% from 1 month to the next. And so I'm not going to be super shocked and surprised if it is higher again here in the sales month of February. And so again, the biggest takeaway from this is that it's not all doom and gloom at auction. Cars are selling, and they're selling for about market value, which I think is a good thing because, over the course of 2020 and especially 2021, we saw a lot of vehicles selling for above market value at auction, and that obviously led to us being in a market situation that was really not good. And so this market, I think it looks a lot better